America is in deep, deep debt, and young people are paying for it. The US added a whopping $1.6 trillion in debt last year. When you hear about the debt and deficit, these numbers have gotten so cartoonish that it's easy to just tune them out at this point. But to put into perspective just how insane this is, the US total debt throughout all of history didn't hit 1 trillion until 1981. It took over 200 years from George Washington to Ronald Reagan to accumulate America's first $1 trillion of debt. And this was a huge deal and a massive headline at the time when it happened. And now we add nearly double that every single year. It's clear this system is broken. It's a BS rigged game with no winners. Gen Z has realized this and rightfully deciding they don't want to work and pay into this crap. And as a result, they've been relentlessly criticized for being lazy and a burden to the economy. But wait, who's really the biggest burden to the economy here? Well, if you look at the facts and numbers, it's not Gen Z. It's actually the very people criticizing Gen Z. If you're a Gen Z or millennial watching this, you are already being pushed to the absolute limit. Living costs have totally skyrocketed out of control, and most of us are living paycheck to paycheck. Then when you finally do receive your already way too small paycheck, you realize it got even further reduced due to taxes. This is an incredibly frustrating situation that many of us live in today. So it's worth it to see where the hell are your taxes even going? Where is the biggest tax burden here? Let's take a look at some of the biggest culprits people understandably feel frustrated by. Number 1, foreign aid. Now, it can certainly be frustrating to know that despite its own citizens struggling, the government would rather take care of other countries than you who actually lives here. But how much does the government actually give? The answer is 66 billion. It's not nothing, but compared in context to the total deficit of 1.6 trillion, it's not much. What about food stamps? I mean, it really sucks knowing that you work yourself to death every day only to know that someone else eats for free, right? Well, the total amount the US spent on food stamp assistance last year was 115 billion. Again, it's not nothing, but compared in context to the entire $1.6 trillion deficit, not that much in the grand scheme of things. So, what's actually the biggest burden that's costing so much money here? Well, now we arrive at our usual culprit in pretty much every single video. Boomers. Social Security is welfare for boomers. It's essentially a universal basic income for boomers. So based on how much everything else costs, how much of your tax dollars do you think are being given out to boomer welfare? 200 billion? Guess again. 500 billion? Still not even close. 1 trillion? Closer, but still not quite. The answer is a staggering 1.4 trillion, essentially enough to match the national deficit alone. We would actually have close to a full-on balanced national budget if we weren't paying so much money into boomer welfare.
Social Security is run like a Ponzi scheme. And every time I say that, I get told, I'm not trying to did okay, well,
Before we go on, let's take a moment to debunk what I'm sure is going to be a common rebuttal point. But they paid into it, so they deserve to take out of it right now. People tend to have a very simple-minded, binary 0 and 1 approach when it comes to economics. Either you work or you don't. Either you paid into it or you didn't. Either you deserve it or don't. But the truth is a lot more complicated than that. The Social Security Fund was established in 1935, at a time when the average life expectancy was just 60 years old, and there weren't nearly as many elderly people. Boomers are living much longer than that, have horrible spending habits, and as a result, are a way bigger burden to Social Security than what it was originally meant to cover. What they paid into it, whatever it was, they already drained out of it a long, long time ago. At this point, whatever they paid into it is totally gone. This is why even though we're paying into it, The Social Security fund is running out so rapidly that none of us are going to see it when we're retirement age. As the guy said earlier, it is us young people that are taking the full brunt of subsidizing the record national deficit worth of taxes just to support boomer welfare at this point, all while they tell us we're the lazy ones and need to just work harder. Part 1, a historical perspective. You should be grateful. In the past, people had to deal with plagues and wars. You should be grateful for the dog shit wages we pay you, because in the past, people didn't even have electricity or running water. Boomers love to use these BS historical arguments to gaslight us. I'm sure you've heard this horse shit from your asshole boomer parents more times than you can count. So if that's the case, using their own logic right back at them is complete fair game. If they want us to be grateful because of the context of human history, we should hold them to the exact same standards. So let's talk about how the elderly were treated before Social Security existed. Social Security was invented less than 100 years ago. This is a tiny speck of dust in the context of 10,000 years of human history. So let's talk about how the elderly were treated before the conception of Social Security. Before Social Security existed, concepts of retirement were a pipe dream for most old people. Most of them literally had to work until their death. If you didn't save up enough money during your prime working years, it was tough luck. You then had to hope you could find a part-time, less demanding job that would support you enough and really cut back on your living expenses. If you couldn't, then your last hope was to try and find some community or charity that would take you in, or rely on your children to take care of you in your old age. This is a common traditional custom we still see in many Asian cultures today. If you were way too big of an asshole and alienated your children, something a lot of boomers have done today, it was tough luck. There was no state or government welfare program to save you. You were on your own. So, if we're supposed to be grateful for these terrible economic conditions they created just because people in the past had it worse, should they give up their Social Security and be grateful just because the elderly in the past had it way, way worse? Yeah, somehow I doubt it. Per usual, they're a bunch of hypocrites who want to live under a different set of rules than everyone else. They want you to be grateful for these horrible economic conditions and not complain. But they themselves would never be grateful and not complain if they had to live like elderly people in the past. If they want to say we're not entitled to anything and nothing is free, would they give up their own Social Security? Not only is that not free, that's literally the biggest expense and burden on the national deficit by far. But at last, per usual, it's okay when they're the ones doing it. The worst thing about all this is that the way they justify and rationalize it is the biggest gigacope I've ever seen in my life. They'll tell you that you're paying into it for yourself and your own retirement in the future, but this is just objectively false. Due to how many boomers are draining from the Social Security Trust Fund right now, Social Security is projected to be cut significantly by 2035. And if it's already set to be cut in 2035, this means that even the oldest Gen Z won't be 40 yet by the time Social Security starts running out. And you still have another 25 years to go before you become of retirement age and get to see any of it. Looking at the current trajectory there is absolutely zero chance there will be anything left when Gen Z and Millennials are old enough to retire. This is just classic boomer climbing the ladder and pulling it up behind you. No generation before them were entitled to Social Security benefits, and no generation after them will be either. They stand alone as the only generation in history to get to be this big of a burden and drain to the system, all while they shame you as being a burden for living with your parents or not working to pay their Social Security. It's no wonder why Gen Z doesn't want to work anymore. They're absolutely right to not want to work, get paid absolutely crap wages to begin with, and still having to pay Social Security taxes for retirement savings that they themselves will never see anyways. Hey guys, I just wanted to say real quick, thank you all so much for this insanely rapidly growing community we've built here. Feels like just a few days ago we were celebrating 10K, and now we're already over 11,000 subscribers. If you're new here and enjoying this content, definitely consider subscribing for more epic takedowns of delusional boomer logic. The solution. Okay, so here's where you're really going to want to listen up, especially if you're a young man. If you've watched my previous videos, you'll know that I'm a huge advocate for universal basic income. But rest assured, this video isn't going to be about UBI. I'm merely going to use the concept of UBI to give you guys some context about how bad you're getting screwed by the system right now. The main criticism I've gotten about UBI is we just can't afford it, and it's just going to make the price of everything go up. But the same thing applies to Social Security and every other welfare program as well. Social Security isn't made of some magic fairy dust money that magically doesn't have any effect on inflation. A lot of you have asked me how I would pay for the UBI, and the answer is really quite simple. A UBI giving every adult $1,000 per month would cost us a total of $2.8 trillion per year. This seems like a lot of money, and it is, until you realize that Social Security costing $1.4 trillion per year would already pay for half of what a UBI would cost. Now, if you simply add the cost of other means-tested welfare, means-tested, meaning the government tests you and determines if you should get it or not, this adds up to a total of $1.6 trillion. So if you were to simply eliminate the total cost of welfare benefits and Social Security, this already pays for the entire cost of UBI and then some. I've heard a lot of you out there expressing the concern that, well, what if the government decides to take away your UBI? What if they use it as a tool to control you? And here's what you guys are missing, especially if you're a young man. The government has already implemented a universal basic income for everyone besides you. The government has already given boomers, single moms, or whoever else you want to blame a UBI, but taken it away from you. You don't need to worry about the government taking it away from you because the government is already giving it to everyone else besides you under this current system we live in. So if they're going to give everyone besides you free money anyways, might as well fight for a universal basic income so that you at least get the same amount yourself. Rather than allowing the government to pick and choose who gets what, it makes a lot more sense and is a lot more fair if it's just universal and we all get the exact same amount. You could also just argue that every social benefit program under the sun should be cut, and I certainly understand this viewpoint. However, there are going to be people in society who we can all agree on deserve social support. For example, veterans who lost limbs in war. You're never going to be able to eliminate welfare completely, and so allowing the government to be able to pick and choose who gets it is a really slippery slope that, as we've all seen, leads to absolute disaster. So hopefully this answers your question of how would I pay for the UBI? It is not a perfect solution, but it's a hell of a lot better than our current welfare system by a long shot. Perhaps the only thing worse than the boomers' financial burden on the national deficit is their stupid logic that we are not entitled to or deserve better. You've undoubtedly heard this nonsense from your boomer parents more times than you can count. So in this video right here, we totally debunk their horseshit logic using historical writings from Renaissance era thinkers. Check it out. I'll see you there. Thanks for watching.